It's a joy being with you here on this Monday, and we have a lot to be encouraged about as God's people. Today I'd like to go to the last chapter that the Holy Spirit inspired the Apostle Paul to write, and that's found, of course, in 2 Timothy chapter 4. And in that passage, he gives some very personal perspectives, and we read in verse 14 about how Alexander the coppersmith did him much evil. And he goes on, and then he says in verse 17, "Notwithstanding, the Lord stood with me and strengthened me, that by me the preaching might be fully known, and that all the Gentiles might hear. And I was delivered out of the mouth of the lion." Isn't that a tremendous testimony? He had great opposition, but in the midst of all the opposition, of course, now he's in prison again. He speaks of the time how God delivered him, but the deliverance was for a very specific purpose. It wasn't his own self-defense against whatever Alexander was saying about him or the others that withstood him. It wasn't to try to prove his point, but his burden was that he needed to be delivered so that truth could be spread out and that God could work in a mighty and far-ranging way through his ministry. And so he said in verse 17, "The Lord stood with me," and that whole thing, God just took care of me. And he did it in such a way that I had the strengthening power of God in me to be courageous, to be wise, to handle the situation properly, so that then the preaching might be fully known and the Gentiles would come to a full understanding of the truth. We don't know the full extent of what he was talking about, but God did a mighty work through the Apostle Paul. And God delivered him out of the mouth of the lion. I think that's literal. God protected him. Many, many times he could have been overcome, but God kept him going. But the key that I want us to see is this. His purpose was declaring the truth. It wasn't about him, as I've mentioned. It wasn't about things going well. It wasn't to have good, comfortable situation. It was instead that he didn't want anything to hinder the forward advance of the gospel and the preaching of the Great Commission, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. He was set on doing that. And God, over and over, stopped the devices of men, stopped the pressures that were against him, and allowed him to keep going. And my friends, God will stop the mouth of the lion for us. Satan can be stopped, and God will strengthen us, and he will stand with us. But it's for those whose focus is the truth. I'm telling you, we can stay encouraged, but we'll lose that encouragement if we have a self-focus. So may God enable us to keep our eye on the real purpose for our life.